Why are we so inflamed? And what is the problem? So, I don't know if you've heard this before, but hopefully you have, that they say the root of all chronic disease is chronic inflammation. So, one of the things when we look at inflammation, we have to understand it is the body doing the right thing at the right time. In fact, you've probably heard me say this in many different aspects of health. Your body is always doing the right thing at the right time. And yet, when a symptom appears, we have a tendency to curse it, ignore it, or medicate it. But symptoms are ways that your body is actually communicating with you. So when we're in a state of chronic inflammation, the body is telling you that it's under a crisis. And in order to handle this crisis, it has brought on this immune response. That's what inflammation is, that it's brought on this immune response to protect it. Now, with that understanding in mind, then we have to look at some of the signs and symptoms of chronic inflammation. And they can be everything from joint pain, like aches and pains, to brain fog, to bloating, to trouble with hormones. Hormones can be an inflammatory problem, and I'll explain that here in a second. So the symptoms very much look like anything that has taken you out of your own vibrancy. So if you're living in a body that has great energy all day, you move really well, you're the weight you want to be, your brain is on fire every single day, you have great mental clarity, there's probably, a good chance you don't have chronic inflammation. But if that's not you, if you're struggling to lose weight, if you have a lot of chronic pain, if your brain fog is bad, now we have an inflammatory situation. So I want to take this conversation down to the cellular level. Each cell is like its own intelligence within you. And each cell is always responding to the environment that you put it yourself in. Now, this is a key point, and this is something I have been trying to express to my Reset Academy members. Whatever environment you put your body in, it will respond to that environment. So if you put your body in a loving, nurturing environment, it will respond by giving you loving and nurturing healing responses. If you put your body in chronic environments where you are constantly eating the wrong foods, hanging around with negative thinking people, toxifying your body with toxic products that are pretty much everywhere now, then your body has to protect itself. And it does that by creating this inflammatory reaction. And each one of these cells on the outer part of the cell has a cellular membrane. And that membrane, the job of that membrane is to breathe. And so it allows the nutrients to come in. It invites hormones to come into the cell. It wants all the goodness that you are doing on a day-to-day environment. It wants to bring that into the cell so the cell can work how it needs to work. But when we are chronically in a state of eating the wrong foods, not moving our body, not getting light, thinking horrible thoughts, chronic barrage of physical, emotional, and chemical toxins, what happens is that cell creates some inflammation around the outside of this membrane so that those toxic things don't get into the cell. But the other thing, now that it has like a wall up, now that it's not an amoeba that's allowing it to flow in and out, now that it has this protective mechanism in it, it can't bring your vitamins in. It can't bring your hormones in. It can't bring the good things in because the cell is on shutdown. So we have to start to look at inflammation as the body's initial step at saying there is a crisis at hand and I'm going to do everything I can to protect myself. But we also have to look at inflammation as a systemic problem. It's not just you sprained an ankle. An ankle sprain is a great example of an acute inflammatory process. So a little background on me. I was a competitive tennis player as a child. And if you've played tennis, especially growing up, you're bound to get a sprained ankle at one point. A lot of moving side to side, for front and back. And I chronically sprained my ankle, and I would twist the ankle, and then the ligaments would be damaged, and then the ankle would swell. And so I knew in that moment, rest the ankle. You couldn't walk because you've injured the ankle. You can see the visible inflammation, and yet you knew in that moment you had to rest because the body was healing itself. The challenge we have with systemic chronic inflammation is that when we are eating the wrong foods, thinking the wrong thoughts, hanging out with the wrong people, exposing ourselves to toxins, it's the same analogy. The cells are under attack and they need to protect themselves so they can heal. So it creates this inflammatory response. But we don't slow down to heal ourselves when brain fog kicks in. We don't slow down to heal ourselves when joints become stiff and achy. We call that aging. We call brain fog menopause, maybe, or we call it, I'm losing my focus. We give it other labels, but it's the same thing as the sprained ankle. There is a healing effect going on, and your body needs you to honor it. So when it comes to cellular healing, there are 3 areas I really want you to think about. First is one way that we can start to really heal the outer part of these cells is to look at our nutrition. And when we look at our nutrition through the lens of inflammation, the number one thing that causes your cells to inflame, this outer cellular membrane, are the wrong oils. So you've heard of insulin resistance, hopefully. Insulin resistance is where your cells can't allow insulin to push glucose in. And everybody thinks that insulin resistance is a too much sugar issue. And insulin resistance is not, sugar leads to insulin resistance, but actually the number one thing that's worse than sugar for insulin resistance are the bad oils. Because every time you eat the bad oils, what you're doing is you're causing this outer cellular membrane to inflame. So the bad oils, I wrote about them in Fast Like a Girl. I've got them in Eat Like a Girl that's out for pre-order right now. I keep coming at those bad oils as much as I can because they are the number one challenge with nutrition. So here we are over here talking about protein, which I love the conversation on protein. But let's go back to the basics for a hot moment. The worst thing you can do for a chronically inflamed body is to eat the wrong oils over and over and over again. These are your canola, your sunflower, your safflower, your vegetable oils, your soybean, partially hydrogenated. Again, there's lists in all the books that I have been writing. So the number one thing for chronic inflammation is we've got to get rid of these toxic oils and then come in with the good oils. You've heard of people who all of a sudden start taking an omega-3 supplement, or they start eating more clean salmon and their cholesterol changes. I just heard a story about this morning. Why did that happen? Because that person brought good oils into their body and repaired the inflammation around the outer cell. And now all the good workings inside the body can get into the cell and can actually do its job. So the first thing with nutrition is the oils. The second thing for cellular inflammation with nutrition is your sugar load. Of course, ultra-processed foods. These are your highly refined sugars, your highly refined flours. They're causing this cellular inflammation, and most of the time they're mixed with the bad oils. So this is why you'll hear me over and over and over again talk about nature's carbs, nature's carbs, nature's carbs. That's what I want you to focus on, is nature's carbs. These are carbs that come out of the earth. Your fruits, your vegetables, they have fiber in them. So instead of going for chips or going for a piece of bread, how about you go for a carrot or for apples, something that has more fiber in it, and that we move our sugar tooth over to what nature has given us. And then the third on nutrition is something that you're hearing me talk more and more about, which is obesogens. In Eat Like a Girl, I have list after list after list of obesogens. And obesogens are toxins that are allowed in our food, and our body senses them as trauma. They are a chemical trauma to our body. And so the cells inflame. So learn how to read an ingredient label. I have a whole tutorial for you on Eat Like a Girl. I literally took an ingredient label and I put it in that book and I deconstructed it so that you all can figure out how to read an ingredient label, because it's gotten really tricky. And so it's very difficult to be able to read ingredient labels. So when we look at cellular inflammation through the lens of nutrition, we have to look at those three things: oils, carbs, what kind of carbs are you eating, and stop eating toxins. Okay, before we count calories, before we count macros, super important. Okay, so that's the first category for inflammation. The second category for inflammation, I keep saying it over and over again, and I want to make sure I really highlight this because this was Bruce Lipton's work. And that is, careful what you think, because your thoughts can create cellular inflammation. So Bruce Lipton, we did a podcast years ago with him, and you can go back and listen to that. And one of the things that he defined in his lab was that when we think negative thoughts, it inflames the outer part of your cells. So who are you hanging around? What are you listening to? The thoughts in our brain are programmed by the environments we put ourselves in. And some of those environments were childhood environments that we still have those belief systems. But if you don't like the way your thoughts are, if you don't like, you can't get to an optimistic place, really look at who you're letting into your brain. I brainwash myself all the time with books. I have books spread throughout my whole house. I pick them up. I read a little bit of somebody's intelligent mind, and I'm like, I want their mind in my mind right now. That's the power of books or YouTube videos or podcasts. One of the benefits of listening to a podcast like this over and over and over again is that you start thinking in a more healthy way, because my voice starts to become your voice. And I hope it becomes it in all the brilliant ways that my belief in your body, if you listen to this podcast over and over and over again, you eventually start believing in your body, because it starts to create a rhythm and neuroplasticity in your brain that tells you you are powerful, tells you that you can heal from anything. That's a big part of my message, is that you're living in a miraculous body. Get out of rhythm with our body has to protect itself, and it does that through cellular inflammation. We have circadian rhythm. We have hormonal rhythm. And when we are putting ourselves out of our natural rhythms, the body responds by inflaming. I'm not going to go into all the details on rhythm. There's a lot to unpack there. One of the greatest podcasts that I've done on circadian rhythm was Sachin Panda. So go back and listen to that. All of, Fast Like a Girl and Eat Like a Girl, about a female's hormonal rhythm. But I really want women, men need to know this too, but I really want women to understand we are rhythmic beings. We're constantly in a state of expansion and contraction, waxing and waning, very much like the moon. And so when we do the same thing over and over and over again, and we don't honor these rhythms, we end up creating an inflammatory response. So when you ask, what is inflammation? It's complicated, right? Because your body is responding with protection by shutting off the cell. It shuts off the cell so good can't get in, but that also means toxins can't get out, and the bad can't get out, and the cell starts to dysfunction, have a dysfunctional moment. So we've got to look at those three things. What am I eating? How am I eating? What kind of rhythms am I putting myself in? And what am I thinking? We have to go through that. Where's my mind going? Who am I listening to? If you don't like the way you think, look at I really believe in this the five closest people to you. What are they saying? Because you may have adopted their thought patterns.